Travelers from the United States may find a number of countries particularly difficult in 2024 because of geopolitical tensions, safety issues, and visa requirements. In this video, we will highlight 10 nations where entering the country may cause serious difficulties or make Americans feel unwanted. Number 10. North Korea. North Korea, which is ruled by a dictatorial regime that strictly regulates its population and information flow, is one of the world's most remote and secretive nations. The nation's leaders use a potent anti-American narrative to maintain control and defend their repressive practices. Historical grievances, especially those related to the Korean War and the U.S. military's continued presence in South Korea, are the source of this animosity. Because of the government's stringent regulations, visiting North Korea as an American traveler carries significant risks. Every visitor must be accompanied at all times by a government-approved guide. Deviating from the recommended schedule may result in serious repercussions, including imprisonment. In addition, travel restrictions have been imposed by the U.S. government, and any citizens discovered in North Korea risk detention or other harsh penalties. Americans are not only unwelcome but also seriously endangered in this environment due to widespread surveillance and the possibility of arbitrary detention. Number 9. Iran. Since the Islamic Revolution of 1979, which led to the overthrow of the Shah and the creation of the Islamic Republic, Iran and the United States have had a deeply strained relationship. Anti-American rhetoric is a common tool used by the Iranian government to garner support at home and divert attention from internal problems. Public perceptions reflect this sentiment, with some people viewing Americans with distrust or animosity. Visitors to Iran must navigate a difficult visa application process, and they might be extensively questioned by officials when they arrive. Because of the possibility of arbitrary detention, the U.S. State Department strongly discourages visiting Iran, especially for dual nationals or people of Iranian descent. The political environment can also result in unforeseen events like protests or civil unrest, which makes it harder for foreign visitors from the United States to be safe. Although there are friendly and outgoing Iranians who are willing to interact with foreigners, the general political unrest fosters an atmosphere in which Americans may feel vulnerable and unwanted. Number 8. Venezuela. Venezuela is currently experiencing severe shortages of basic necessities, hyperinflation, and widespread poverty as a result of a deep political and economic crisis. A do not travel advisory has been issued by the U.S. government for Venezuela, citing the risk of arbitrary arrest, violent crime, and civil unrest. Many Venezuelans hold grudges against the United States because they believe that U.S. foreign policy, especially its support for opposition groups and imposition of sanctions, exacerbates the problems facing their nation. Americans visiting Venezuela may thus run into animosity or mistrust from the populace. Travelers face serious risks due to the deteriorating infrastructure, a lack of dependable healthcare, and a lack of basic services. Due to the pervasive anti-American sentiment, the combination of these factors creates an extremely unwelcoming environment where Americans may feel unsafe as well as unwelcome. Number 7. Libya. Since Muammar Gaddafi's overthrow in 2011, Libya has been in a state of chaos due to persistent disputes between opposing factions and a dearth of efficient governance. Because of the significant risks of kidnapping, armed conflict, and terrorism, the U.S. State Department strongly advises against traveling to Libya at any time. Because different militias are active in different areas, the security situation is unstable and frequently results in violent conflicts. Given the complex legacy of U.S. military involvement in Libya's affairs, Americans there may be seen with suspicion. An environment that is hostile to foreigners is exacerbated by the existence of extremist groups and the general lawlessness in many areas. Furthermore, Americans who might find themselves in dangerous situations have few options due to the lack of a stable government. Libya is therefore regarded as a very unfriendly location for American tourists. Number 6. Syria. One of the worst humanitarian crises in modern history has resulted from Syria's ongoing civil war, with millions of people displaced and incalculable losses in life. A strong travel warning has been issued by the U.S. government, cautioning against any travel to Syria due to the potential for violence, terrorism, and kidnapping. There is a lot of anti-American sentiment, which is stoked by ideas about U.S. military presence in the area and its backing of particular warring groups. Visitors may face animosity from residents who equate Americans with the suffering brought on by the conflict. Travel is exceedingly risky due to the absence of infrastructure, the existence of armed groups, and ongoing military operations. The state of humanitarianism is appalling, and Americans might encounter precarious situations. Ultimately, an atmosphere where Americans are not only unwanted but also seriously in danger is produced by the confluence of violence, instability, and widespread anti-American sentiment. Number 5. Yemen. Yemen is suffering from a terrible civil war that has caused widespread sickness, starvation, and humanitarian catastrophes. The high risks of kidnapping, terrorism, and armed conflict make travel to Yemen extremely discouraged, according to U.S. government advice. Because of the ongoing conflict, different factions are fighting for control in a chaotic environment, and Americans could be seen as targets because of their nationality. Tensions have been made even worse by the humanitarian crisis, which has increased animosity toward foreign meddling in Yemeni affairs. Particularly in regions under the control of rival factions, travelers may run into hostility and suspicion. Americans find it more difficult to navigate safely due to additional obstacles posed by the lack of infrastructure and basic services. All things considered, Yemen is a very hostile place for Americans to visit, carrying serious risks to one's personal safety. Number 4. Iraq. Particularly after the 2003 invasion and continued military presence, the relationship between the United States and Iraq is still complicated and frequently tense. Although there has been some stabilization in some areas of Iraq, there is still anti-American sentiment, especially among those who see the U.S. as an occupying force. Travel advisories are still issued by the U.S. government because of the potential for terrorism, kidnapping, and civil unrest. Visitors from the U.S. may face mistrust and animosity from Iraqi citizens who link them to the fallout from the U.S. military campaign. Everywhere in the nation has a different level of security. Some areas are still quite dangerous while others are comparatively safe. It might be difficult for visitors to handle these difficulties, and there's a chance of violence, which could make things uncomfortable. Because of this, many Americans might feel uncomfortable and unsafe in Iraq, especially in regions where there has previously been fighting. Number 3. Afghanistan. Afghanistan's security situation has drastically deteriorated since the Taliban retook power in 2021, resulting in a humanitarian crisis and pervasive instability. Travel to Afghanistan is strongly discouraged by the U.S. government because of the risks associated with terrorism, civil unrest, and the possibility of arbitrary detention. Because of the U.S. military presence and the effects of a protracted conflict, many Afghans hold grudges against the U.S., which can make the country unwelcoming to American guests. It is a very dangerous destination due to the lack of infrastructure, healthcare, and basic services, which further complicate travel. Americans may encounter animosity and mistrust in Afghanistan, especially in areas where anti-American sentiment is strong. Due to the confluence of these elements, traveling through Afghanistan becomes extremely dangerous for Americans who are not only unwanted, but also highly vulnerable. Number 2. Pakistan. Tension has always existed between Pakistan and the U.S., especially after military operations and drone strikes in the area. While violence and extremism are problems in some areas, stability is relatively high in others. Strong anti-American feeling can exist, particularly in areas where U.S. foreign policy is felt. Travel advisories have been issued by the U.S. government because of the potential for terrorism, kidnapping, and civil unrest. Traveling Americans may face mistrust and animosity from Pakistani citizens, who see them as agents of U.S. policies they disagree with. Travelers may encounter uncomfortable or dangerous circumstances due to the unpredictability of the security situation. All in all, the confluence of these elements produces an environment that is difficult for American tourists, making Pakistan a place where they might feel uncomfortable. Number 1. Cuba. The political atmosphere in Cuba is still tense even though travel restrictions have loosened recently. Certain sections of the Cuban population harbor mistrust towards Americans due to the U.S. embargo and past grievances. While a large portion of Cubans are friendly and willing to converse with American visitors, others may voice dissatisfaction with U.S. policies they feel have negatively impacted their nation. Communication and cultural barriers may present difficulties for tourists, especially in places where anti-American sentiment is stronger. Additionally, given the ongoing economic difficulties and the complexity of U.S.-Cuban relations, the political climate may make visiting Americans feel uneasy on the island. Even though there is a chance for good interactions, Americans might not always feel totally at home in Cuba due to the country's political situation and historical background. These nations serve as a reflection of both the difficulties in maintaining international relations and the possible dangers that Americans may face when traveling overseas. Thanks for watching our video, and don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel.